I'd like to invite Rémi and Hubert to come back up because we're going to continue now. Yes, you can stay here, Patrice. We're going to continue now with the question period. We've got around 30 minutes, and I'd like to remind you once again of the same addresses that were given at the beginning: ep@radio-canada.ca/apm@cbc.ca, and also you can participate on Twitter with the address that's up there on the screen, RCAPA, that's the hashtag there, or also CBC APM. So first of all, a question for Hubert. You announced in June that you were cutting 1,000 to 1,500 posts to finance the transformation of Radio-Canada. What costs so much, and what do you want to achieve to oblige you to actually remove a quarter of your staff? Well, it's not easy in Radio-Canada with this situation. There's about $1 billion that comes from the government, a little bit less, and the rest is $500 million, which are absorbed by our own activities. And in this environment, we're out of the $500 million. There's about 80%, which are advertising revenues. You've heard that advertising revenues in TV are migrating towards the digital platforms. And you also see that we've had an increase in our operating appropriations apart from inflation. Since the last time we had an increase was in 1973, so we've got a model that's no longer working. If we want to have flexibility to reinvest in our future, then we have to realize that our income, our revenue is under pressure, so we need to give ourselves some room for manoeuvre, and that's why we've got the strategic plan. When I hear Charles and his the cry from the bottom of his heart, I very understand what he's driving at. Yes, a second question, 30 minutes once again, Hubert. Both the population and the Radio-Canada CBC workers are against this transformation step. So when are you going to actually step back or resign? Yes, that question comes up often.
Around the panel, around this evolution and where we're going. Je pense que ça, c'est aucun doute.
There's no doubt about that. Let's talk about the program, about my possible retirement at the end of my term of office, but I very much believe in this direction. We're going to continue to be flexible. When I look back on the history of CBC Radio-Canada, often the CEOs, the presidents are asked to resign, but those who are asking for resignation have not actually put forward any suggestions for other forms of finance or to have a vision that would allow us to go in that direction. So what I'm saying is that we're going to continue to do our work. We very much believe in it. And what you've heard about this shift and the current environment, that's where we're heading. I'll take a final question by email, and then we'll go into the room. It's for the panelists.
Would describe the internal culture at CBC Radio-Canada. Do employees feel united and collaborative as one single team, coast to coast, or are there too many silos and internal competitive behaviors? Qui veut prendre cette question?
It's getting better.
It's getting.
Who wants to take that question?
40 years, and unfortunately, for most of those 40 years, we lived the two solitudes between Radio-Canada and CBC. And yet, if we pool our resources, we can be extraordinarily powerful on all levels. And we're starting to do that now. For instance, at Découverte, recently, we broadcast a report from the Fifth Estate, right. Silence of the Labs. On a traduit ça par...
We translated that by science and power that's actually being gagged. So is science actually having a gag put on it because of governmental decisions?
We had the chance of throwing the water bottle on the floor.
And that's what happens behind the scenes. Exactly.
Well, at least, we're communicating. So what we did was we had this report that we were able to work with, and we added some francophone, Canadien, Français, Québécois content, and we made a great story. And there were no holes barred in that story. It was an extraordinary story, very critical, but very objective on what's happening. And that is an extraordinary example of what we can do when we pool our resources. Ça commence à se faire de plus en plus.
We're starting to do this more and more. We're starting to speak more between the CBC and those who are working Radio-Canada to do things together when it's possible. So it's really improving.
There is more sharing, right, between, in particular, the investigative units. And I think that there's power in that. I would find that sometimes at government level that they would try to say, well, the story's not that big because it's regional. Only English covered this story or only French covered that story. If we work together, that excuse is gone. And in particular in that, the Silence of the Last that you talked about, because you make these stories national, because you are forcing on the agenda the fact that Canadians, French or English, it doesn't matter, care about the same things largely, especially accountability at the government level. If we share our resources, if we share our talents and our knowledge, and we make sure that all Canadians see it, all Canadians put the pressure for accountability. So journalistically, there's huge traction to be had in that. But even on the other side, we were talking about the fact that when I was in Sochi earlier in the year, I'd been to the Olympics before for CBC, and it was the two solitudes, English and French. I don't even know if I ran into anybody in Beijing. In Sochi, we were physically in the same space working together and trying to manage the work as well as we could and trying to help each other. It's not always easy. There are language barriers. I'm the one with the earpiece in today. But we are all trying to manage that and to work better together than we have in the past.
But it's getting better. Okay.
I think it is.
Huge changes, Rebecca. There are huge changes. When I used to work here, sort of even 5-6 years ago, the TV and the radio were on different floors, and the arts were on different floors within CBC in Montreal. Now we're all in the same space.
That's true.
It's a huge difference. When I work at the Current, it's not just that we work together on the same floor as it happens, but there's part of the team is in Vancouver and participates in discussions via video link. So absolutely silos are being broken down. The CBC, I think, is more connected as a workforce than it has ever been in my memory.
Certainly ways to go, though. I think everybody would acknowledge that.
On va commencer par prendre des questions.
So we'll take questions in the room. I'd like to remind you to put short questions and just one question per person because there's many of you that have lined up in the at the mics and we want to give lots of opportunities. Good afternoon. I'm Nadia Alexandre. And I think that it's not a secret that Mr. Harper really wants to dismantle Radio-Canada. He wants to privatize everything. So we have to really increase the funding for Canadians so that Radio-Canada CBC can survive. And for the board, if the majority of the people on the board of Radio-Canada make financial contributions to the Conservative Party, action speaks louder than words. Do you have a question? I would like
trying to be so competitive that we lower the standards of Radio-Canada to the lowest common denominator. I resent that. I want les enjeux politiques to be discussed.
We need to discuss what's at stake, political
issues, and chapeau to les journalistes who
and well done to all of the journalists.
But I don't want the Peter Mansbridge and his group of people who discuss things to tell me who's winning and who's losing. I don't want to know who's winning and who's losing. I want political issues to be discussed.
Okay, and you feel that they aren't right now. Vous n'avez pas de questions, par contre.
You don't have a question, it seems.
Mission enquête, bravo, chapeau, fantastic.
Merci.
There's no equivalent in the English language.
D'accord, on va faire le message à Alain Gravel. Merci, madame.
Thank you. We'll get the question across to the right person. Yes. Do you have a question, sir? I'm Pascal Géridon, and I have a question for Hubert Lacroix. Now, by way of introduction, when I listen to Mr. Lacroix, I have the impression that I'm listening to a politician, someone who's hiding behind a theme here. It's the media crisis, that you're hiding behind the fact that we need to transform or renew things. But don't do more than what you do. That's what Camus said. So I have the following question. If it takes an army of people, as Patrice Roy has said, to pursue good democracy and the right culture here in Canada, When are you going to be able to tear your shirt before the government? Say, look, we need to get funding, we need to get people, and let's stop hiding behind this screen so that we really get the resources to allow our democracy and our culture to continue to live. Well, in the world in which we live, the media environment is changing. It's not me that's invented that. I'm not hiding behind that. I'm trying to do that and react to this in the best way possible with the board of directors. Well, you don't seem to be too worried. You're talking about all of this in a positive way. Well, I'm disappointed that you think that I'm not worried by all of this. From the very first day, because I've been in this job for 7 years now, and from the first day onwards, the first slide that I put up on the first speech was about funding of CBC Radio-Canada. One of the 18 public broadcasters, we had $33, and it was about 90, but now it's much higher, and we've got lower contributions. It's always been the same thing. If we had more dollars, we could do a great deal. I can hear that, and I also understand that in the current environment, since 1973, they've never actually changed anything with the operating appropriations, apart from to adjust them for inflation, and not even each year. So the objective of the board is to see whether this door is closed, and if that door is closed, how can we actually increase our financial means? And that's where the conversations are taking place. You're aware of that. And when I hear this concept being bandied around that me or that the board thinks that it's satisfying, that it's nice to make cuts with the talent that we've got and our corporation, or have to shrink down the reality of the environment in which I'm living, because we are all attached to the public broadcaster, and we want this to continue. And so we continue to talk about funding, and we're trying to find means to be able to fund our public broadcaster. And the 2020 plan that everyone's discussing at the moment, that's the direction that we want to take. Could we perhaps intervene? Well, I feel rather ill at ease, because I'm not an employee of Radio-Canada. Radio-Canada is my client, and I'm ill at ease. But I'm not the only one who's ill at ease. There's other people who'd like to talk to you, but they don't dare to do that because there's so much tension. So I'm just wanting to say to you that one day, I see Jocelyn Descent, we are the main people in Radio-Canada, because I wrote to Virginie for 14 years. From the first 7 years were produced by Radio-Canada, and the 7 others were produced by ETS, my own production house. I didn't want to produce Virginie. That was not my intention, never. But one day, Daniel Go, who was here, I am looking over to you, I'm talking to you. But anyway, I was asked to come into the office, and I was told that I would have to start producing. I didn't want to do that, but I noticed that day that people didn't really know how much Virginie cost, and we became the private producers, and we started to produce for Radio-Canada. But before, it was Radio-Canada that actually produced all of this itself. So for better or for worse, some are going to say for worse, but others are going to say for better, because it's given me work and I get other people working as a result of my work. So at one point, we were making a completely different. I produced 30 Vies in the same way as I would do with Trauma or other TV series at $112,000 per hour. We've done that. One day we said, right, we haven't to start complaining about this. We just have to get organized. So what's bothering me here, because I work with great people in Radio-Canada, but it seems that there's no discussion. People aren't getting organized. I've got ideas to share with you, and for Hubert and for others to share with you. Now, I don't do newscasts, but it's difficult for people who are working here. If you go down into the basement in Unit 9, where we're filming Unité 9, and there's many technicians that I work with in Radio-Canada, and they're not just good, they're excellent. We're going to New York at the weekend for international awards, and I'm going to send a letter to everyone to say you are the best. But even the population and my family from Lac Saint-Jean, I can't even explain to them that, yes, the costume department is important, but it's not as important as jobs. And we're going to still keep the best costumes. And those journalists who called me up and said, Fabienne, do you use the costume department? No, we've got a production budget for our costumes. We don't actually go there. And she didn't want to listen to me. It's become such a violent environment that I was telling her the truth, and she didn't want to listen to me. And it's really tough. I almost feel like leaving because I don't feel that I'm part of your discussion today. I feel very ill at ease, as if I don't fit in. I just wanted to actually express and say that I'm not the only one. But for all of us, Radio-Canada is really important, but at the same time, things move on. It's moved on for us and for drama and for fiction. Things are moving, and we have to continue to see how we continue to work with a smile on our face and in an enthusiastic way, because we're in the creative industry. I'm talking about what I'm doing, fiction and dramas. Now, of course, it's different when you're dealing with the newscast. I'm not going to talk about the news segment. That's not my area. But I think it's a real pity. I've listened to you, and I saw you down there, and you seem really aggressive. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, perhaps I need to drift off here. You know, I feel like slinking off. You're saying, but I'm feeling this. I'm thinking, no, I'm not pleading in favor of one person or another. I'm just saying there's people here, and there's people who are feeling ill at ease with this situation. Yes, we can feel the tension. We realise that. And sorry, yes, thank you very much for saying that. Now, we will continue. Just a minute, please. Could I answer? Now, who's speaking now, please? Thank you very much, Fabienne. Who next? No, thank you very much for that. Yes, we have a question. Just one question, quickly. Well, it wasn't the question I was going to put, but now she's saying that I'm looking maybe aggressive. Now, if you've got a question, well, first of all, I come from the QP, so yes, I'm going to put a question to Mr. Lecroix. I would like to know why you're not out in the public square publicly asking for an increase in public funding. That's what I want to know. Why are you not out there asking for that? And it's a real pity there's not going to be any studios, because we're going to go down from 12 studios to just one in the new restructuring. That's a pity, because I'd like you to be able to produce your shows within the Radio-Canada studios, because they're very good programs and everyone's still working. Right, we've just got 50 minutes. I think Hubert has already answered the question, which was quite similar, but I can answer again, and perhaps I can also listen to Louis talking about production and what's happening in-house and the choices that we are taking. But sorry, you haven't actually answered the question, Hubert. Which question are you referring to? The question is, why are you not publicly standing up and asking for an increase in the budget for Radio-Canada CBC? Yes, I'll answer that question, says Hubert. I'd like to repeat. The last increase in the operating appropriation was back in 1973. That's a fact. That's a fact. So when we're confronted with that fact and we want to increase our financial flexibility, do you really think that at the moment, with the government, whoever the government may be, but with this government, it was the same with all the governments. You said it was the same thing with the Liberals. Do you really think that we're going to actually get an increase in our basic funding? Just a moment, please. That's why you think that we're not asking for this. But I'd like to repeat that all of the different interventions that I have been undertaking over the last 7 years have been aimed at increasing our financial maneuverability and room for maneuver. It's not just the basic appropriation. There's also the fund for improving local programming. That was very important for us. And we got about $50 million for Radio-Canada to be able to have local and regional content, but the CRTC decided that had to be died off. And Cogeco and Bell and Videotron are actually getting our signal and are actually making money with the content that you produce without sending in dollars to us from the subscribers for the content that is produced. It's this model which means that all of the broadcasters, we're with like TVA and CDV and Global, we're all producing content and we're looking for one thing. We want to ensure that the work that's done by our artisans should actually be remunerated. And that is the big question that we put for the CRTC and the conversations that we constantly have publicly. So there are other ways of getting some financial flexibility rather than just asking for a request where the answer is always that the public broadcaster gets 1 billion per year. We have to realise, yes, we understand if there's more money, there would be more flexibility and we'd be able to produce more content, so we'll give them more resources. I understand that, I get that. Well, I'd like to interrupt you because there's just 12 minutes and there's other questions to come from the web. There's one that's directed, was question 4 to Louis. Bill, yes? I can't see you down there. Good afternoon, Louis. What is the SRC going to do to ensure that there can be a varied local programming content for all of the Francophone communities in the country? Yes, it's quite a challenge because, as Hubert has mentioned, we've gone through a period where we did have specific funding for diversifying local programming content. We've made a commitment to remain present in each of the regions in the country. We've had to make choices. The main choice that we've made is to continuously offer 7 days a week news programming from all the different local stations. That's our minimal position, and that's what we'll be working on. But I'd just like to draw a small comparison with the past. But just 7 years ago, the level of local programming in all of the regions of the country was smaller than it is now, despite the difficulties that we're facing. But it's true, we do need to make choices. First of all, we have to ensure that we can keep this link with our TV viewers and listeners and those who are consulting us on mobile platforms, because in the region we've got mobile platforms as well. So we have to ensure that we keep these links 7/7 in terms of news and all the different platforms, the TV, the radio and the web. And then gradually we want to be able to offer different types of programming if we have the funding so that we can also travel out to the regions. Now, talking about mobility, thank you very much, Louis Lalonde, who's the VP for French Services.
Morning on CBC Radio. I don't own a computer, comme tu disais. Why is CBC emphasizing digital and mobile? What about those of us who are loyal radio listeners?
We are emphasizing mobile and digital because the world is changing, but we are staying with, we're still on 88.5 FM and we will continue to be on 88.5 FM here in Montreal. And we're very aware that there are listeners who get in touch with us. That person, I don't know how they got in touch with you without a computer, though. I'm beginning to wonder about that.
Maybe by phone. Maybe by phone. BlackBerry, I don't know.
It could be, okay. But, the radio is, of all the media here, I think the oldest, right? For CBC Radio-Canada, and we're still going, and we're a pretty vital group of people, and there's an incredible attachment, as that message testifies, and we're not going anywhere.
Great.
Just to tell you how vital they are, morning shows across the country, 20 of 23 morning programs across CBC, 1, 2, or 3 in their respective markets, and in 12 of those markets, they're number 1. Alors, quand on parle d'être pertinent,
we're talking about being relevant, then CBC Radio is a good example. We've got 8 minutes. Yes, sir, in the room, please. One question, just one question. For Mr. Hubert-Lacroix, I'd like to know why the management of Radio-Canada buys in, for example, Downton Abbey, which comes from PBS in the US, or scientific productions from the BBC, which come out on Découverte, but it's much more logical to actually put dollars into good CBC productions, such as The Nature of Things of David Suzuki or The Fifth Estate, and And I have the impression we still have these two solitudes today. So perhaps the Commission of the Official Languages needs to get involved officially so that we can encourage the two sides to actually talk to each other, because sometimes even foreign correspondents might be bilingual and could give better coverage of the planet. You could have a French correspondent and an English-speaking correspondent in Washington. Could you not just send down a bilingual correspondent and have somebody else that would then be able to cover Moscow and Beijing? I think we can really improve things there. There's two parts to your question. I'll ask Louis rather to answer on the first part. Well, on Downton Abbey, I'll give you a very simple question because it's awfully good TV. And when we're a public broadcaster, you have to ensure that you give access to the viewers what is actually the best in the world and not just do some self-improvement. And then secondly, if you listen to Radio-Canada and CBC, then no doubt you've seen 2 weeks ago there was an extraordinary investigative report, which was simultaneously beamed out on Fifth Estate, showing the development with certain Canadians that go outside the country and join the Islamic State to carry out this sort of crusade. There's Canadians that have followed them with the resources put forward by the CBC and Radio-Canada, and that was then put out the next morning out to us. When we're talking about the understanding of what's happening in the country, that's what we're really driving at. And when we're talking about Shell pulling together resources from both sides, that's what we're doing. And if you actually follow the TV and not just think that you're listening to what people say about Radio-Canada, you'll be able to see that these events are happening more and more in terms of journalistic collaboration and also in other sectors. So that's what we are. Could Michel perhaps be given the mic to talk about for foreign correspondence, who is the director of news? Thank you very much for that question. Well, I was in fact one of the bilingual correspondents myself. It's true that model worked for a long time, but it's more difficult today because you have to cover the radio and TV and web, and you have to do it in the two languages. It becomes almost impossible in terms of workload. And we have to be beamed out live on LDE. So it's not that we're not working together. We work together in a different way. We pool together resources. For example, if we have two teams in Iraq, one from CBC and one from Radio-Canada, we share the equipment. We pool together resources to ensure that we have access to the information twice. We've got that sort of balancing act that we do. And then when we've got correspondents who are bilingual and who are covering an event. We've got lots of examples with Jean-François Bélanger, who is our correspondent in Paris, and he was based in Moscow before. Jean-François, when it's relevant, he can actually produce reports for CBC as well. We are in direct contact with them each day, so we try to maximize as much as possible all of this so that we can really get the maximum advantage from our teams on the ground. So that is our answer. We work differently because we're asking our journalists on the ground to do more than they had to do before. They were just, for example, covering TV so they could be bilingual and cover both sides. But we've got an even bigger commitment to work together, nevertheless, because we've got less resources and we need to maximize these. Thank you very much, Michelle. We've just got 4 minutes left. So 2 questions. No, I'd like to... should we go to the public? Yes. Yes. I come from Laval, and I've got a question to Mr. Roy and Ms. Sween as well.
Vous nous disiez tantôt que malgré l'Internet...
You were saying that despite the Internet and all of this, you've continued to offer news and digest and select and filter all of this news. And I know that you're undergoing a transformation in CBC Radio-Canada, but if you're going through this transformation, could the news perhaps talk about subjects that are not covered by traditional media, that they don't dare to talk about? For example, as we see in Huffington Post or on certain websites as well. If you're going to transform, perhaps you could transform the news and actually take that path as well and move down that path too. Well, thanks very much for that question. Yes and no. Yes. I think we have to be open-minded to what's coming out on the market. News is like a big river. You've got big boats, all the different media who are describing this, and then you've got small vessels that you don't always see out in the water, and you have to see them as well. And we often see that in our teams amongst ourselves. We have to take off our blinkers and force ourselves out there, because often it looks like we're just doing the same thing as everyone else. Perhaps we have to push things a question further. We do try and do that, and sometimes you see that. And yesterday evening, I think that we saw that. We pushed the limits, comparing these two districts, but not to hammer home that point too much. But when we're talking about transformation, we're not talking about lowering the bar in terms of our requirements for credibility. It's either true or it's not true. You hear lots of different things in the media that you've cited, which are not necessarily checked out. And they turn out to be wrong, so we don't want to get too crazy. But yes, we do need to open things up. And it's true, we have to talk about things that perhaps we didn't mention so much in the past, either in Radio-Canada or in the US with the big networks. It shouldn't just be repetitive. We need to be open-minded. You're right. We need to open ourselves up to what's new, but with the same instruments, and we have to remain rigorous. Yes, would you like to intervene?
Sure, I can address it to the extent that we haven't already, but my view on this has been the same throughout my own career. We don't have to function as a business in the classic sense, but in many respects we do. If we aren't delivering what people want to consume, then really I'm broadcasting to my children and my mother, and that's it. I want people to watch my work, to listen to my work, to stop what they're doing when they hear my voice come on because they believe in what I have to say, that I'm important to their understanding of what's going on. So then it's my task to make sure that's what I'm delivering, which means I have to have my eyes open and I have to watch what people are consuming. It doesn't mean I am now going to talk on the program that I do, a news network, about Kim Kardashian's butt. I don't care.
Sorry, I find that funny.
I didn't care before it was available to be on HuffPost or anywhere else. But I do pay attention to what people are interested in. And as much as we've talked about being competitive with Vice, last week, I watched a half-hour documentary produced by Vice that had incredible access that showed me parts of ISIS I had not seen. The work was good. It was very good. And I have no problem saying that about the competition. It reminds me that I have to be better. I'm not at all intimidated by what else is out there.
No, you said
that
to bring it earlier.
Yeah, bring it.
You said bring it.
I mean it. And I think we have to pay attention to what people are consuming. It doesn't mean we dumb down. I don't think people are dumber than they've ever been. Expectations are higher than they've ever been, and we need to meet that.
That's absolutely true. Thank you. Merci, Patrice et Diana. Question.
Thank you, Patrice and Diana. Just a question from the floor. Could I just say something? Because I've been thinking about our conversation. To come back to what you said. Yes, it's true we could have produced it downstairs. That's true, but we're all going to have to produce elsewhere with the technicians from here. We're not going to stop, are we? We're not going to start. We're going to be elsewhere. We're going to continue creating things. And here I'm talking about fiction. Just intervene. Just 1 minute, please. Just one question. And then perhaps you'll be able to talk offline afterwards with the different presenters. Time's ticking away. Yes. I'd like to talk about the vision of the future of the population, which is more and more split. Is there a question? Yes, of course there's a question. That's why I'm there. I came up to put a question. I wrote the letter of resignation for Belacqua, which has been asked for by the population. And when are you going to sign it? And I'm going to hand it over to you with my very own hands. Well, I'd like to repeat that I have the intention of completing my term, the 5 years. I very much believe in public broadcasting. I've expressed this in lots of different ways. Our corporation is undergoing many changes because of the environment in which we're working. There's a great deal of talent here.
Said bring it. C'est comme ça que ça termine cette.
And that closes the 6th edition of the annual public meeting. Thank you very much for having been here with us, and thank you very much to all of the panelists.
Merci à vous tous de vous être déplacés.
thanks also for all coming along, and thank you for having sent in your questions by email. And the questions that were put most often will appear on the corporate website of CBC Radio-Canada in the next few days. So turn to cbc.radio-canada.ca/APA or cbc.radio-canada.ca/APA. And thank you very much to all of you who have followed us via the web. That was the 6th edition.
Thank you again to our panelists. Merci. À l'année prochaine.